Hey YouTube, how is it going? I hope all is well. Today we are going to try to show what power amp distortion does in the grand scheme of things in an amplifier. We're going to try to keep the front end side of it out of the equation. Objectively, we're just trying to see what the impact of your power amp section has on the sound of your amp. Initially, this is going to be a video about why you don't like power amp distortion as much as you think you do. And then I realized I don't really have a way to empirically show that. But what I do have is enough variation in amplifier topologies to kind of give you an idea at least of what the impact of the power section is. So let's go over the 4 amps that we're going to see today. We're going to start off with the PV-XXX. This has a very similar front end, almost identical front end to that schematic I was just showing. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But this amp here, you cannot get the power amp section to go into distortion, period. No matter what you do with any part of this amp, you cannot get the power amp to go into breakup. That's all there is to it. So it's great because this amp kind of shows what this genre, I'm going to call it genre, of amps are really kind of designed around. They are meant, you know, preamp designed to get the core of that sound, and the power amp is meant to just make this much, much louder. That's it. I'm not saying all of them work that way, but I would say the majority in this genre of amplifier are going to work like that. Then we're going to get into, I guess we're going to call it the boutique type style of amplifiers, right? But this is an amplifier design of my own. There are similar ones of it out there, but this one is mine. So this one here, there is no preamp distortion whatsoever. It is a parallel triode, which is to say that if you took a 12AX7 and took both of the triodes that are within it and ran them in parallel, they go from there almost literally straight into the phase inverter. There is a variable, coupling capacitor thing going on here. That's what the low cut is. There is a volume control, so I can, vary how much distortion gets into the phase inverter, or not distortion, but vary how much volume goes into the phase inverter. Now, there's a post-phase inverter master volume as well. So I've got a pre-phase master volume and a post-phase master volume. So one's before the phase inverter, one's after. So what I can do is vary the amount of gain into each of these two halves of the power section. So I can either have nothing but phase inverter distortion, or I can actually get a little bit. There's a small window of how much, power amp distortion only within this amp. The high cut is more like a Vox tone cut or whatever the hell I call it. So it works just like that. So this amp is kind of cool in that regard, but there is no preamp distortion. It's all power amp in one way or another. From there, we're going to go into an Ignator Tweaker 15. This one's a slightly different design from the other ones. This one is either preamp distortion or power amp distortion, or a little bit of both. This amp, you can get the power amp to distort prior to the, the preamp section of it, but there's a small window, pretty quick. By the time you get to the type of gain that you want, you're going to end up with some amount of preamp distortion in it. But it kind of gives you an idea of how you can get between the two, right? So there is that. But after this one here, we're going to go into this guy here, which is my 5-watt design. There was a build series I did on this amp not too long ago. A short little thing about this guy. It is back in my possession currently. The unfortunate thing is the auction, although it went well, the organization made over 100K. That is amazing. But this amp did not go for what we'd hoped. A little bit of a pride shot there, a gut shot, if you will. I kind of knew it wasn't going to go that great, which is why I had some friends come to bid on it, and one of my friends was able to win the bidding on this amp. So because my friend won the bid, I get to hold on to it for a little while. It didn't garner as much money as I'd hoped for the organization, but I am a nobody. I don't claim to be a somebody, so I wasn't expecting it to go for high dollar, which is why I had some friends come with cash in hand, and I was lucky enough that one of them was able to take it home for me to create more content with it. So there is that. Anyway, this amp here is much like my 18-watt design. Take a parallel triode, so 12AX7 with both of its triodes ran in parallel, through a volume control directly into the power section, and there you will have nothing but power amp distortion. So this one kind of shows you how an amp sounds with nothing but power tube distortion. Although the problem with this one is that it's single-ended Class A, so it has a slightly different sound than you're used to from different amps, unless you are into that kind of sound. So let's go back to the schematic. Why did I choose to show you this particular schematic? Well, pretty simple. This one, the predominant reason I picked it is because with this schematic alone, I can kind of show you all the topologies of the 4 amps that I just showed you. The second reason is, obviously this channel is kind of meant to be like a learning type of channel, an inspirational kind of channel to try to get you to think and give you ideas. This one, this particular schematic is a little more difficult to read. Some of the earlier schematics I've shown in other videos are just a lot easier to read. They're really laid out well, and you can, a child can almost look at them and make sense of it. This one is a little bit difficult because it's a lot of handwritten stuff. It's older, and they're just not as clear. It's an older, PDF style thing, and it just wasn't written all that great to begin with. And over the years, a copy of a copy of a copy just is not as good as the original. So this one kind of forces you to, what's the word for it? Forces you to kind of have to research things a little bit and make sure that you know what you're looking at. Like, does that say 230 volts? What does that say? Do we know? Like, it almost looks like it could be 750 volts. We know it can't be that much, but so it forces you to kind of think about like what it is you're possibly working with. You know that one says 320, so that being 350 kind of seems plausible. So you can kind of deduce from that what some of these different values are. You can tell that that's a 0.1, which then possibly means that even though you can't really tell what that is, it's probably a 0.1, right? So just things like that to kind of get you to think a little bit more. But let's get into the schematic topologies of these different amps. The PV-XXX has the most in common with this particular design, almost entirely. The clean channel, that is, anyway. So we're only worried about the clean channel. But you go in through the input, it goes in through a gain stage, through a tone stack, directly into a tone stack, into a makeup gain stage, and then into what I'm going to call a buffer stage. I'm not going to get into too much detail, but this one here is just, we're going to call it a buffer stage. Leave it at that. From there, it goes into a phase inverter, and then, of course, the power tubes. That's exactly what happens in the PV-XXX, on the clean channel, at least anyway. So, again, on the PV, you cannot get this part of the amplifier to go into distortion at all, period. So, we'll kind of see that in the video. Next, we get into the 18-watt design of mine. Take out the tone stack altogether, take these two guys here, run them together in parallel, drive them straight into this guy here. So just draw a beeline over to here with a volume pot in between, and you got that. I have another volume pot in there with the high cut, and so you can differentiate the distortion of the phase inverter or the output tubes. That's that. Next, we go into the Ignitor Tweaker 15. Now, the Tweaker 15 has a solid state gain stage in the front end of it, but we're going to pretend that is this guy here. Take this tone stack, move it here. So you go in through your first gain stage, and then these guys here are always in circuit together, cascaded. So they always cascade into each other. Those switches, that hot and clean thing, just changes how much gain each of these two will introduce. That's that. From there, it goes into a tone stack, and from the tone stack goes through volume control, of course, into the phase inverter, and this section here is all tied together as one. There's that. Finally, we get into the little the 5-watt design of mine. That one there, again, get rid of the tone stack altogether. Take these two, tie them together in parallel, put a volume pot right here, and beeline it to one power tube, and you've got that amp. That's literally what it is. It runs in Class A, it's single-ended. So it has a different sound, but it's 100% nothing but power tube distortion. In all of the other designs, you get a variation of gain distortion, that is, from the phase inverter and the power tubes. With the exception of the XXX, which none of this part here distorts. But in the 18-watt design in the Ignitor Tweaker 15, this section here, you cannot separate from one another, so they all distort. The distortion that comes from here and or here is kind of tied together, if you will. So that is how that works. Now, let's get into actually how all these amps sound. Again, the purpose of this video is to show what the effect of this is versus the preamp side of it. We're focusing on how the power amp kind of introduces its sound into the sound of the amplifier. That's it. All right, thank you so much. Let's get on with the sound samples. All right, so here we are looking at the PV-XXX. You can see I've got some of my signature mods being done to it. Hi. So what we're going to do is go into the clean channel. Right now I got it set pretty low, the master volume all the way up. I'm sorry if it sounds a little distant. I kind of gotta look away when I talk and all that fun jazz. So here's what it sounds like just kind of as it is. So, as you can tell, it's pretty darn clean, right? So, that's that. Let me turn down the DAW a little bit here, and we're going to turn up the amp. So, I'm going to go, it's about halfway up right there, right? I'll get a level here real quick, and it's somewhere in there. So you can kind of tell right there, it's just on the verge of breaking up. Right, so I'm going to try to go a little bit quick through this. I'm not going to try to spend too much time. So you can kind of just tell right there that it's just on the edge of breaking up. And then let's go ahead. I'm going to turn the volume down a little bit more for the thing. And I'm going to go about 3/4. So that's about 3/4 of the way up. Let's get some level here. So again, you can kind of hear it's breaking up. Alright, so just to give you a little bit of what's going on here, I'm actually playing into, in order to make this as fair and even as I could between each of the amps, I'm going into a Torpedo Captor X with a stock IR, I think it's of the orange 4x12 or whatever. It was a good cab that kind of exposed all the amps in, I think, a good way. Turn that up all the way. I might have to turn this down a little bit. Pretty close. All right, so what we're going to hear here is obvious crunch. Nothing crazy, right? But I can show that that is nothing but the preamp here. So I'm going to turn down the master volume. I'm going to be... let's turn it to halfway. I'm going to have to turn the volume up here on the thing. So that's with the master volume halfway down. I can tell you right now that it didn't really change all that much, right? So that, I'm sorry, I'm also not trying to play anything in particular. It's just a bunch of random crap. But so the volume, the master volume on this is now at a quarter, just over a quarter. And I'll turn up the input on the DAW a little bit there. So you can tell it doesn't change. So I'm going to turn the DAW down, and we're going to bring the master all the way back up. And again. So I hope that kind of shows, like, you can tell this amp here, and I can tell you right now, even if I go to the gain channels, there is no breakup in the power section on this. The way this amp is designed, there is no output distortion or output section distortion. A lot of the amps that are like this are like this. So if you get amps that have a lot of preamp stuff going on in them, they tend to be, you know, cleaner in the output section. Angle, Rev, you know, things like that, Fortin and some of those other amps like that, they're gonna be clean in the output section. It's literally just an amplifier designed to make the preamp as loud as it can with whatever 100, 120 watts will allow for. This one is one in such a vein. So the 5150s, they might warm up a little bit. I think that design actually does kind of get the phase inverter and the power tube section to kind of break up, but not as much as you think it does. I think really when you start getting up that loud, it's just, you're really starting to hear the speakers start to crunch. I haven't heard too many that have gone through a Captor X or something like that. But the point being, this guy here, at least, this amp at least anyway, only has distortion from the preamp. So in this case here, it's got, you know, the makeup gain stage, and then perhaps that intermediate stage that I'm going to call the buffer stage. All right, so let's move on to the next amp. So let me get all that set up, and I'll see you back here in a few. Okay, so this one is going to be a little bit different. This is my 18 watt design here. Sorry, it's kind of an odd view. It's, I don't know, whatever. You get to see my couple helmets up there. In either case, this guy here is a 18 watt design. It's pretty simple, realistically. I'm not showing you my nice clean one because this one here, I'm kind of in the final tuning stages, if you will. But we've got, from that side to this side, I guess it would be from right to left, we've got low cut, volume, master volume, and then we've got the high cut. I usually leave the high cut all the way up. It just really kind of depends, but we're going to start out with the low volume and the master volume all the way up, just to kind of show you the clean sound. Get this dialed in there, right in. So as you can tell, clean, right? Nothing crazy about it. You can also tell it's a little bit more mid-forward, right? And it is a little bit more mid-forward because there is no tone stack. Without the tone stack in this amp, it has more of a, what's the word for it? It just has more of a mid-forward sound. I'm going to bring up the bass just a little bit. There we go. So we'll put it right in there. All right, so now let's gain it up just a little bit, and what we're going to expose first is some of the power tube distortion. So I'm going to turn the DAW down a little bit here, and I'll go about halfway up. This is the preamp is still clean at this stage here. So what I mean by the preamp is still clean is if I turn down the master volume, you'll hear that it cleans up. So go like that. So now I gotta I'm sorry, you're hearing a little bit more hiss from the gaining up of the DAW, or the whatever, the recording interface that I got. So this is an 18-watt model, so it's, you know, like 1/5 of the output power of the PV down there, right? So in order to get the same level, the same volume, I got to turn it up a little bit more on the DAW to get the level. So you can tell it's still clean. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to turn down this a bit here. I'm going to bring the master volume back up so we can actually start to hear the power tube distortion this amp has. So there's that. Whoa, touchy. Yeah, right there's going to have to do. All right, so. Alright, so you can hear there is actually power tube distortion there. That is not the phase inverter, that is power tube only. So this amp, like by the time right about there, we're going to start getting some phase inverter distortion and obviously the power tube. Alright, so I'm going to turn this down a little bit here, and now what we're going to do is expose the, we're going to go the other direction with it now. So now we're going to get phase inverter distortion only. So, I'll leave it right there at 1. So this is the phase inverter, just starting to get into the gainy side of thing. I got to bring the DAW up a bit here. Alright, so you can hear a lot of the hiss there. Let's turn it up just a little bit more and actually start breaking up the phase inverter a little bit. Alright, so you can hear it starting to break up. Now as I go higher up, obviously we're going to get more phase inverter distortion. So I'll do that, and you'll notice down, I turn the master down a little bit. Hopefully try to even out the volume there. So this is nothing but phase inverter distortion. So part of the original... A big part of the original video I was going to make was about how important the phase inverter is to the core of the sound in terms of like a JCM 800 or something like that. Once this phase inverter starts to break up, you can hear it's obviously a sizable part of the distortion of the amp, right? So now what we're going to do is turn the DAW down, and we're going to start to eke up the master volume. I don't think we're going to be into tube amp distortion at this point quite yet, but maybe. Turn the turn the DAW down a little bit more. And let's go like right there. Let's go, I don't know, 75 or whatever. So now we are getting into power tube and phase inverter distortion, of course. And then, of course, if we dime it, so this is dimed. So there you have it. You can tell right away that there's a lot more distortion when you got them both. And then, of course, you can play around between the two. So if you want to smooth it out a little bit, you can roll them back a little bit. So there is that amp. As you can tell, you can kind of dial in the distortion where you want it to be. This amp has no negative feedback, so that it starts to grid up a little bit earlier. It's easier to get this thing to break up. All right, so let's stop this one and let's move on to the next one. All right, so now we've got the Ignator Tweaker 15 here. I've got it set up pretty much as clean as it will be for having the master volume all the way up. Obviously, if I turn the master volume down, it'll clean up a little bit more. So let's go ahead and do that actually. Let's just make it a little bit cleaner here. There we go. Now it's actually like clean, right? All right, so this one is probably the most complicated of the amps that I'm exposing today or showing today. It's a tweaker, right? So the AC is where I have it set for the tone like knob situation thing. As best as I can tell from the schematic, that is actually its natural state. So that's basically the off position for the tone stack. So that's its natural state. And if you go to Brit and USA, it changes the values around to two different things to create the different sounds that it does. The modern is just one form of negative feedback and vintage is just another. So they're both, it has negative feedback in both positions. It's just how it differs on each one. And then of course it's got the deep and normal. I'm not going to mess with those. It's too bright when it's, you know, got the bright in, and it's too, I don't know, it's too not bassy. It's not bassy enough without it. I think the tight deep is just a bypass cap removal or some other circuit that they do to roll off the bass in the preamp. So in either case, let's take a gander at this one. So obviously this is clean. So this is probably going to be this is the dirtiest of the amps that we're going to expose today, and it's probably, realistically speaking, it has the most range. And it has the most range because it has the most available gain, at least in this channel. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to turn the master down. I'm going to bring the gain up. Right about here, I think, is when it starts getting into the, it starts breaking up internally. Like its gain stages start to break up. I gotta turn up the DAW here. So you can just tell it's starting to break up right there. I'll bring the master down and let's bring up the gain a little bit more. So now we're actually going to start getting into preamp distortion. Bring the gain up just a little bit. There we go. I'll dime out the gain and so you're kind of hearing that we're getting into the. It's so keep in mind it's cascaded triodes in the gain stage there, so it's actually starting to break up kind of like almost like a JCM 800 might. It's got about that number of gain stages. This is in the clean mode. The hot mode, it just starts turning into a hot mess really, so I'll do that real quick. But that's always been one of the downers to this amp, is that the hot side is a little too woolly, whereas the clean side, I like it a lot, especially if you put a boost pedal in there. If you get a boost going, it really kind of... You get a little bit of the cleaner, but JCM 800 kind of distortion going. I'm not going to use a boost pedal because I'm trying to make this as even for all these as possible, but... So let's go the other way with this now. So now I'm gonna go all the way up with the master volume, and we're gonna start to hear the. Oh damn, that's really really hot. I'm sorry. So you can kind of hear it. There's a big difference in how it attacks the. Attacks the inputs. So even with the gain as low as it is, we're like right on the verge of breaking up, which is to say that it's probably getting the phase, not getting the phase inverter so much to break up. It could be actually the output section that's going first, but let's turn it up a little bit more and let's find out. I'm going to turn the DAW down a little bit. So what you're hearing there is nothing but output section distortion. So that's the phase inverter and the output tube starting to break up there. So this amp starts getting pretty messy as you dime it. So this is halfway up right now. And you're gonna notice here that it doesn't really get louder so much as it starts to just get more just gritty. So now we're starting to get into preamp and output section distortion. So it's starting to really get a little gritty. It's almost starting to swirl a little bit here, and as we dime it, we'll actually start to hear some of that. It'll almost, sorry, here, we'll turn that down. It'll almost start to sound like it's like, well, it'll have like a in the background kind of thing going on, like swirly. Kind of hear it's like almost like little mosquitoes in the background. It can do the clean amine, it's just really, really difficult when you're... By the time you're down that low on the volume, like the feedback loop and the output section is really working so well. It's almost like hyper compressed, like it's weird because you get so much of the pick attack and whatnot out of the amp. Even though you're playing really, really soft, it feels like you're just blamming away on the thing, but so that's what I'm saying. Like it's like the antithesis of dynamics when you start getting an amp that has like feedback loop in it and whatnot. It does the clean to mean without really much change in volume, but like I didn't really expose it on the other amp. I'll show a little bit more on the 5-watter, but playing really, really softly or really, really quiet with the volume down is like it's not as quiet as it feels like it should be. Like you get a lot of pick attack out of it, but you kind of could hear that this thing is just right on the verge of like getting swirly. You can almost hear like the little mosquito kind of thing in the background. This amp has almost too much gain for its own good. If you can imagine going into the hot at this here. So hell, let's just freaking do it. Let's dime this thing. Yeah, it turns into a fuzzy mess really quick. So I don't ever use the hot channel in this amp. So I'm not going to go too crazy. I think we're going to call it right there with this one. Let's go on to the last amp, and then we'll maybe put together like another thing that actually just shows them all kind of one after the other. All right, so we're on the final amp now. This one's probably going to be the easiest one really realistically, but it's also going to be the longest segment probably, just because I'm going to explain a little bit more about why things go on. So in either case, I'm at the spot here where I feel is kind of the magic spot, if you will, for this amp. Alright, so why do I think this is the magic spot? Well, because if you turn down the volume on the guitar a little bit, It's of all these different designs, it's kind of the most what's the word for it? Like, it's got that range where you can actually get clean and then get a little bit of grit, and it's great because it doesn't really change the sound of the amp too much. So the sound kind of stays the same, but if you were to drive it with a pedal, it really can get into mean zone. So let's turn this down just a little bit. Obviously right there it's going to be clean, or I'm going to tell you I know that it's going to be clean. All right, so obviously we know this amp does clean. Let's roll it up. So this is the amp dimed, obviously. Now what you're gonna notice with this is it's a little blatty. It starts to splat out a little bit. Obviously the challenge with an amp like this is you don't want to neuter it too much, because then at quieter levels it'll sound a little too thin and anemic. But you want to try to give it some balls, so in order to give it some balls, you almost end up going too far with it. In my case, that's kind of where it's at. It's a little too much balls. It's like right on the verge of blocking distortion, which I could probably remediate, but I really didn't design this amp to be a growler. Obviously, I could just reduce the coupling capacitor a little bit to thin it out just a bit, and that would also solve that problem a little too. But for this particular one, I was kind of trying to stick it, like I said, it was meant to be more of a pedal platform amp. I didn't want to neuter it, and I did not anticipate anybody ever wanting to set it up there all the way at, like, you know, as high as, you know, gain maxed out or whatever. So like the Brian May AC30, right? He uses the normal channel of the AC30, not the top boost channel. So the normal channel on the AC30s is literally just one triode going straight into the phase inverter, and it's pretty woolly. It's got, I think, a 0.047 or something like that in the as a coupling cap. So it's really woolly, really dark sounding almost. I didn't want to have it quite as dark as that, but I didn't also want it to be quite as woolly. What makes that amp work so well for Brian is that he uses a range master or some other like treble boosting, you know, preamp pedal, not preamp pedal, but, you know, pedal. He uses a pedal in front of the amp to get the sound that he has. That's what drives it to that point. And that's kind of what this one excels at. I'm not doing that today. We'll do that on some other video. But what's great about this amp is when you back it down a little bit, I'd say right into that range, right in there somewhere. When you get it right in there and you throw a boost pedal in front of this thing, especially one that has, you know, like a little bit more treble when you start boosting it, this amp just soars. But so, yeah, you can see it cleans up a little bit when it's there. You know, it's gritty, it's growly, all that jazz. So you can imagine that by the time you start throwing some boost in front of it, or, you know, something like a Wampler Triumph or something like that, a nice overdrive pedal, it really just comes to life. if you turn it down a little bit more, you can actually run like a reverb in front of it, and you know, it kind of stays in that range where, you know, by the time you throw a grit pedal in front of the reverb, you don't really notice any of the distortion so much from the power section of this amp, as you know, as much as you would think you would. So now, if you were to only use this amp for the distortion that it has on its own, I would say right in there is probably the sweet spot. That is not quite all the way up, you know, but it's out of the splat zone. Almost. Maybe I got to turn it right in there, maybe. So you can hear it doesn't quite splat as much, but it's still a little woolly. It's definitely on the woolly side, but I kind of assumed that by this point in time you'd be utilizing some pedals. So it can do the growlery kind of thing, but you know, like I said, it was really designed as a pedal platform amp. This one, it's kind of turned into a promo video, if you will, for this amp, because I'm super duper proud of it. I love this amp. But in either case, I hope the predominant objective of this entire video, I know it's turning into a long one at this point, but is that you can get an idea of the different sounds of amplifiers and how they create their distortion. So you had the PV-XXX, which has, you know, it didn't really have any power amp distortion at all. It kind of has that gritty kind of thing going for it, which is cool because it's great because it's a great pedal platform in that regard. If you turn the gain down a little bit, or the volume for that clean channel, you can really put any pedal you want in that amp and it's going to sound pretty dang good. The Ignator is definitely the messiest of them, although it has a really nice core sound. Like the amp in and of itself sounds great, but it can get out of control in a hurry depending on how you set it up. I love that amp, especially in the, you know, the clean mode with the master volume dimed, and then, you know, you use a boost pedal in the front end, something that really kind of helps drive the amp to that level that you want, the level of distortion that you want. It's mostly power amp distortion at that point, but you have just a little bit, just a hair of preamp distortion as well. So that's kind of cool. And then of course, if you want to wool it up a little bit, you can play with things and get it there, which is kind of cool. I like that. My 18 watt design, that's probably my favorite amp. It really can do that AC30 kind of chime thing if you want it to. It's definitely the most versatile of the amps that I have ever played. I didn't really try to sit there and expose it, but I mean, you got to imagine that you can get it as clean, like literally as clean as clean gets. The haunting cleans, if you will. It does that thing. And then you can get a bit of that JCM 800 kind of growl going. It kind of has that thing going for it when you get the phase inverter distortion going. Again, you throw a boost pedal in there. You got just enough EQ control to really kind of take it. You know, it can darken it up or wool it up a little bit. You can also thin it out enough where it's not too woolly. And, you know, it has kind of that JCM 800-esque growl to it. Or you can just dime the amp out and then you get kind of that, I don't know, that EL84 grit that a lot of people really like. It kind of still has that 18 watt thing going for it. My big thing with my 18 watt design is that I try to get the mosquitoes out of it, the fizz, the swirl. I try to get that out of it, so it's a little more just of a growl, more so than any of the grit and the splat. But that's kind of the downer to the Ignator, is by the time you really start getting into that level of distortion, you can kind of hear the little over the top. Like you can kind of hear the little mosquitoes kind of running around in the background. Obviously you can somewhat mitigate that, but it's too much of a good thing is still too much. And I think the Ignator has a little bit too much gain on tap for its own good, which I think is its biggest, its weakest thing, its weakest attribute. And then of course my little 5-watt design here. This guy obviously is just, there's nothing to it. It's meant to be a clean amp, believe it or not, even though it's only a 5-watt. It's meant to be more like a bedroom / studio type amp, or maybe on a well supported stage, or just a more, I'm gonna say, adult friendly band. It's not meant to blow the front row out. It's meant to just be kind of in the mix. And then of course a well supported band that has a sound guy, or a full size stage with microphones and all that. Obviously you'll have no problem with this amp, but again, it was kind of meant to be more of a clean pedal platform amp, where when you have the pedals off, you get a nice clean sound. Again, the haunting cleans, if you will, just a beautiful clean. You can get that edge of breakup kind of thing going for it, and then you can throw the boost, you can throw whatever you want to throw in front of it, and it really just eats it up. It just loves it. So there's that. I hope this portrayed that well, without seeming too much like a promo video, but thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next one.